You're telling me these humans willingly consume a neurotoxin every morning just to function? Ambassador Kalax's facial tendrils writhed in disbelief as he stared at the datapad. Not only that, replied First Contact Specialist Zixna, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with barely contained amusement, but they've turned it into an art form. They have entire establishments dedicated to serving different varieties of this coffee substance. Some of them pay the equivalent of several galactic credits just for a single serving. The two Vexillians sat in their observation post on Luna Base, watching Earth through the reinforced viewport. The massive blue-green marble dominated the view, its surface a swirling canvas of clouds and colors that would have been considered beautiful if it wasn't such a terrifying death trap of a planet. Remarkable, Kalax muttered, his tendrils now coiled tightly against his head in what passed for a Vexillian headache. And they evolved on that Class 12 Deathworld? Zixna helpfully supplied, her spots now flickering in the pattern that indicated she was thoroughly enjoying her superior's discomfort. Yes, they did, though they prefer to call it Earth or Terra. Quite a pleasant name for a planet that regularly tries to kill its inhabitants with everything from microscopic organisms to massive geological events. The Vexillians had long considered themselves the galaxy's premier Deathworlders, having evolved on a Class 8 planet that most species would find completely uninhabitable. Their reinforced exoskeletons, redundant organs, and advanced immune systems had made them the undisputed champions of survival in harsh environments. That was until humanity made first contact 6 standard months ago. Did you know, Zixna continued, clearly warming to her subject, that they actually seek out dangerous situations for entertainment? They have something called extreme sports, where they deliberately put themselves in life-threatening scenarios, for fun. Kalax's tendrils went completely rigid. You're making this up. I wish I was, she said, pulling up another file on her datapad. Look at this activity called skydiving. They climb to high altitudes in primitive aircraft, then jump out and fall toward the ground at terminal velocity. They only deploy their safety devices moments before impact. But why? According to my human colleague, and I quote, for the rush. Zixna's spots pulsed in the equivalent of a shrug. Apparently they find the adrenaline surge pleasant. Kalax stared at the datapad, watching video after video of humans engaging in what any sane species would consider suicidal behavior. Rock climbing without safety equipment, diving into underwater caves, running toward rather than away from dangerous wildlife to get a better picture. At least tell me they have some sense of self-preservation, he pleaded. Zixna's spots flickered in what could only be described as a mischievous pattern. Well, they did develop something called insurance to financially compensate for injury or death. Does that count? Before Kalax could respond, their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash from the adjacent room, followed by a string of what their translation software identified as creative expletives in English. Ah, that would be Lieutenant Thompson, Zixna said cheerfully. She's probably trying to repair the environmental controls again. Trying to... But that's a certified engineering task. She's a security officer. Yes, but apparently she watched a few videos online and thinks she can fix it. Zixna's spots were now pulsing in a pattern that indicated both amusement and resignation. You'll get used to it. Humans have this fascinating tendency to believe they can accomplish anything with enough determination and access to something called YouTube. As if on cue, Lieutenant Thompson's voice carried through the wall. Hey! Anyone know where I can find a screwdriver? Or like anything vaguely screwdriver-shaped? No reason, just asking for a friend. Kalax's tendrils drooped in defeat. Please tell me she's not typical of her species. Oh no, Zixna assured him, her spots now practically strobing with delight. She's actually one of the more cautious ones. Wait until you meet the maintenance crew. They have something called Hold My Beer and Watch This Thursdays. The ambassador made a sound that his species used to indicate extreme distress. I thought we were prepared for this. We're Deathworlders ourselves. We survived evolving on a Class 8 planet. We should be able to handle anything. Zixna patted him sympathetically with one of her upper appendages. That's what we all thought. But you see, there's a fundamental difference between us and humans. We evolved to survive our harsh environment by developing biological adaptations and avoiding unnecessary risks. Humans. She paused, searching for the right words. Humans looked at their deadly planet and decided to treat it like a challenge. They don't just survive their death world. They actively seek out ways to prove they can master it. Another crash sounded from the other room, followed by a triumphant, "Ha! Fixed it!" And then, worryingly, is it supposed to make that noise? Kalax's tendrils wrapped themselves into what humans might recognize as the equivalent of a facepalm. How have they survived as a species? That's the most fascinating part, Zixna said, her spots now pulsing in a pattern that indicated deep appreciation. They've survived precisely because of this seemingly contradictory combination of traits. Their curiosity drives them to explore dangerous situations, but their adaptability and problem-solving skills allow them to survive and learn from them. They've turned their greatest weakness, their fragile biology, into their greatest strength by developing technology and techniques to overcome it. The environmental controls suddenly hummed to life, and cool air began flowing through the vents. Lieutenant Thompson appeared in the doorway, covered in what appeared to be mechanical lubricant, but wearing a proud grin. "See? Good as new. Though, we might want to requisition a new hydrospanner, and possibly a fire extinguisher. Also, did anyone else know that the secondary cooling system uses a liquid that looks exactly like coffee, but definitely isn't coffee? Because that would have been useful information about 10 minutes ago." Kalax's tendrils went completely limp, a sign of total resignation. "I suppose I should include this in my report to the High Council." "Oh, definitely," Zixna said, her spots now pulsing in a pattern that somehow managed to convey both professional composure and barely contained laughter. "Though you might want to wait until after tomorrow's scheduled cultural exchange activity. Lieutenant Thompson has organized something called a paintball tournament between the human security team and our honor guard." "Paintball?" Kalax asked, already dreading the answer. "It's a simulation of combat where participants shoot each other with capsules of colored dye," Lieutenant Thompson explained cheerfully. "Don't worry, we've modified the velocity of the projectiles to account for your exoskeletons. Mostly, probably. We'll figure it out as we go." As Kalax watched the human bounce away, presumably to clean up whatever chaos she'd left in the other room, he turned to Zixna with what passed for a Vexillian expression of despair. "We're supposed to be the galaxy's premier Deathworlders. We were proud of that title. We earned it through millions of years of evolution, in one of the harshest environments known to sentient life. And we still are impressive Deathworlders," Zixna assured him, her spots now pulsing in a gentler, more sympathetic pattern. "We're just not the only ones anymore, and perhaps that's not such a bad thing. After all, who better to help us understand the galaxy's deadlier aspects than a species that treats them as entertainment?" From somewhere in the station, they heard Lieutenant Thompson's voice. "Hey, quick question. Is anyone using that experimental plasma containment unit in Lab 3? And follow-up question, how attached are we to the current configuration of the East Wing?" Kalax's tendrils twisted into what humans would later learn to recognize as the Vexillian equivalent of a hysterical laugh. "You know what the worst part is? I'm actually starting to understand why they're like this. Their planet tried to kill them, so they decided to kill it right back, with science, engineering, and what they call sheer bloody-mindedness." "Exactly," Zixna said, her spots now pulsing in a pattern that indicated both pride and amusement. "That's why the Council assigned me to this post. I was the first to realize that humans aren't just Deathworlders like us. They're Deathworlders who decided that the best defense is a good offense. They don't just survive their harsh environment, they actively challenge it to do its worst, then improvise a solution using nothing but determination, duct tape, and what they call vibes." The station's public address system crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. Despite what you may have heard, the situation in Lab 3 is completely under control. The containment field is holding at, let's call it acceptable levels, and the slight purple glow in the East Wing corridor is perfectly normal, and definitely not cause for concern. Also, if anyone knows how to reset a quantum harmonizer using only paperclips and optimism, please report to Lab 3, for completely unrelated reasons." Kalax's tendrils writhed in what was becoming a familiar pattern of resignation, mixed with reluctant admiration. "I suppose I should go help her before she accidentally discovers a new form of fusion." "Probably," Zixna agreed, her spots now pulsing in what could only be described as fond exasperation. "Though knowing humans, that might actually be the best possible outcome. Did I mention they once discovered a fundamental particle because someone spilled their coffee on an experimental sensor array?" As they hurried toward Lab 3, Kalax found himself composing his report to the High Council in his head. Honored council members, I regret to inform you that we must revise our understanding of what constitutes a Deathworlder. It seems that while we evolved to survive our harsh environment, humans evolved to challenge theirs. They don't just adapt to deadly conditions. They actively seek them out, study them, and then figure out how to turn them into either a scientific breakthrough or an extreme sport. Sometimes both simultaneously. The corridor ahead of them was indeed glowing a rather interesting shade of purple, and they could hear Lieutenant Thompson's voice growing louder. Okay, good news and bad news. Good news, I think I just discovered a new state of matter. Bad news, it's trying to eat through the floor. But hey, if we can stabilize it, this could revolutionize waste management across the galaxy. Anyone have any suggestions? Wrong answers only. Those seem to work best with humans anyway. Kallax and Zixna exchanged looks, or rather their species' equivalent of looks, and hurried forward. After all, they were Deathworlders too, and if there was one thing they'd learned from humans, it was that the best way to handle a potentially catastrophic situation was to dive right in and figure it out as you go. Besides, as Lieutenant Thompson liked to say, what's the worst that could happen? The answer, as it turned out, involved 3 new scientific papers, 2 revised safety protocols, 1 slightly altered law of physics, and what would later become the galaxy's most popular extreme sport, quantum surfing. But that's another story entirely. Part 2. Quantum surfing and other human sports. Explain to me again, High Council Member Tzax demanded, their tendrils practically tied in knots. How exactly this quantum surfing works? 3 standard months had passed since the Lab 3 incident, and Kallax found himself standing before the High Council, trying to explain how a routine maintenance mishap had somehow spawned an entirely new branch of physics and, more worryingly, a competitive sport. Well, he began, his tendrils curling in what was now a familiar mixture of pride and existential dread. It turns out that when you combine an unstable quantum harmonizer with Lieutenant Thompson's unique approach to problem-solving, you get a localized field of semi-stable quantum flux that can be ridden. Ridden, Tzax repeated flatly. Yes, Kallax confirmed. The humans discovered that by using modified gravitic boards and proper protective equipment, which they developed by, and I quote from your report, throwing science at the wall and seeing what sticks. Another council member interrupted. That is technically accurate, Kallax admitted, though they prefer to call it rapid iterative testing under extreme conditions. Zixna, who had been quietly enjoying her superior's discomfort from her position near the back of the chamber, decided to help. Perhaps a demonstration would be more illuminating. Lieutenant Thompson has prepared a short exhibition. Absolutely not! All 12 council members shouted in unison, their tendrils forming what humans would later term the Nope Formation. That won't be necessary, Tzax said, regaining their composure. The videos included in your report were quite thorough, particularly the one labeled Epic Wipeout Compilation, Best of Week 1. Kallax's tendrils writhed apologetically. In fairness, they did perfect the safety protocols after the first few attempts. The quantum containment fields are now rated for. Let's move on to the other matter, Tzax interrupted hastily. The humans have requested permission to establish what they're calling an X Games division at the Galactic Sports Federation. They want to introduce several of their recreational activities to the wider galactic community. Ah yes, Kallax said, his spots pulsing in what had become his default state of resigned amusement. They've prepared a comprehensive proposal, very professional. They even included safety waivers in 17 different languages. Safety waivers, Tzax repeated, in the tone of someone who had encountered this concept before and still couldn't quite believe it. For activities they intend to perform voluntarily, for entertainment. It's actually quite fascinating from a cultural perspective, Zixna chimed in, her spots pulsing enthusiastically. The humans have developed an entire legal framework around their tendency to engage in potentially hazardous activities. They call it liability management. The council chamber fell silent as its members collectively processed this information. Finally, Tzax spoke again. Your report also mentions something about them wanting to organize an interspecies parkour championship? Oh yes, Kallax said, brightening considerably. That was Lieutenant Thompson's idea. She thinks it would be an excellent way to promote cross-species understanding and athletic innovation. The preliminary tests with our honor guard have been quite promising. though we did have to modify some of the obstacles to account for different biological capabilities. Modified how? One of the council members asked, clearly against their better judgment. Well, for example, we found that the standard human wall run technique needed to be adjusted for species with exoskeletons, and the zero-gravity section had to be recalibrated after we discovered that Andromedans can effectively teleport short distances when startled. Makes for quite an exciting competition, actually. The council members' tendrils collectively drooped in what was becoming a common response to human-related briefings. There's more, isn't there? Tazax asked wearily. Well, Zixna said, her spots now pulsing with barely contained excitement. They did also mention something about wanting to combine quantum surfing with something called Battle Royale gaming concepts. The sound that emerged from the council members could only be described as a collective biological keyboard smash. But on the bright side, Kalax added quickly, they've already developed most of the necessary safety protocols, and the quantum containment technology they created has some fascinating applications in energy production and waste management. Their engineers are calling it extreme science. Apparently, they've found that approaching research with the same mindset they use for extreme sports leads to some rather impressive breakthroughs. Of course they have, Tazax sighed. Because why would humans approach scientific discovery any differently than they approach jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft? Exactly, Zixna exclaimed, missing or choosing to ignore the sarcasm. They've even started a research methodology they're calling X-Science. It's based on the principle that any sufficiently advanced research should be, and I quote, radical enough to make your safety officer cry. The council chamber erupted in a chaos of writhing tendrils and pulsing spots as its members tried to process this latest development. Finally, Tazax raised all four appendages for silence. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, they said slowly. In the span of 3 standard months, humans have accidentally created a new form of matter, turned it into a competitive sport, developed comprehensive safety protocols and liability frameworks, applied the principles of extreme sports to scientific research, and now want to share all of this with the wider galactic community? That's a very succinct summary, yes, Kalax confirmed. Though you forgot to mention the merchandise line they've developed. The quantum surfing ride the wavelength t-shirts are quite popular among the younger members of various species. Tazax's tendrils formed what humans would later recognize as the xenobiological equivalent of a migraine. And your recommendation is? Kalax and Zixna exchanged glances before Kalax spoke. We recommend full approval and support for their initiatives. While their methods may seem unconventional, we cannot deny their effectiveness. Moreover, their enthusiasm for sharing these activities with other species has already led to improved interspecies relations and several technological breakthroughs. Additionally, Zixna added, if we don't approve it, they'll probably do it anyway and just call it an underground extreme sports scene, which would be much harder to monitor and regulate. The council members conferred among themselves for several minutes, their tendrils and spots creating patterns that would have given a human semiotician a lifetime of material to study. Finally, Tazax turned back to Kalax and Zixna. Very well. The council approves the humans' proposals, with one condition. All future extreme activities must be developed with at least nominal oversight from a joint species safety committee. The humans have actually already formed such a committee, Kalax said, though they insist on calling it the Radical Research and Development Risk Assessment Team, or RAD-RAT for short. Of course they have, Tazax sighed. Very well. You may inform Lieutenant Thompson and her colleagues that their proposals have been approved. May the cosmic forces have mercy on us all. As Kalax and Zixna left the council chamber, they could hear the humans' celebration through their communicators. Apparently, someone had already organized a quantum surfing victory party in anticipation of the council's approval. You know, Kalax said thoughtfully, his tendrils forming a pattern that indicated both amusement and anticipation. I'm actually starting to look forward to seeing what they come up with next. It's never boring, at least. That's the spirit. Zixna's spots pulsed encouragingly. Besides, Lieutenant Thompson mentioned something about combining quantum surfing with something called roller derby for the next exhibition. Apparently, it involves... The rest of her explanation was drowned out by the sound of Kalax's tendrils tying themselves into what would later be classified as an entirely new configuration of existential crisis. But that, as humans would say, is just another day in the life of the galaxy's second most extreme Deathworlders. Part 3. When in Rome, Do as the humans do, at your own risk. 6 months after the High Council's fateful approval of human extreme sports, Kalax found himself staring in disbelief at his datapad, wondering if perhaps he should have his optical sensors checked. "Zixna," he called out, his tendrils forming what humans now recognized as the "please tell me I'm hallucinating" pattern. "Could you verify something for me?" His colleague glided over, her spots pulsing with curiosity. "What is it?" "According to this report, the Arcturians, the ones who were so risk-averse they wouldn't leave their home system without triple redundant navigation systems, have just opened their first quantum surfing academy." "Oh yes." Zixna's spots brightened considerably. "They've made some fascinating modifications to the sport, actually. They're using their natural ability to perceive quantum states to perform what they're calling probability manipulation tricks. Lieutenant Thompson says it's, and I quote, totally sick, bro." Kalax's tendrils writhed in confusion. "But they're Arcturians! They file safety paperwork in triplicate just to use their food synthesizers." "Not anymore," Zixna said cheerfully. Apparently, after watching humans combine dangerous activities with careful preparation and safety protocols, they realized they could channel their natural thoroughness into making extreme sports safer while still maintaining the essential radical nature of the experience. She paused. "They still file the safety paperwork in triplicate, though. Old habits die hard." Before Kalax could process this information, their conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice from the station's communication system. "Attention all personnel. The Andromedan Teleport Tag League exhibition match will begin in 15 minutes in Recreation Zone 3. Spectators are reminded to stay behind the quantum containment fields at all times, as some contestants may accidentally phase through conventional matter when attempting particularly ambitious moves. Also, the snack bar is now offering Quantum Crunch cereal. Taste the probability flux." Teleport. Tag. League. Kalax's tendrils formed question marks, a habit he'd picked up from spending too much time around humans. "Oh, you haven't heard?" Zixna's spots pulsed with what could only be described as glee. "It's the latest hybrid sport. The Andromedans were so impressed by human parkour that they wanted to create their own version. It combines their natural short-range teleportation abilities with human-style obstacle courses and quantum surfing elements." "And people actually watch this?" "Watch it? It's become the highest-rated sport in 3 sectors. The quantum wake effects create these beautiful light trails as the players teleport around, and the slow-motion replays of near misses are apparently spectacular. They're talking about adding a zero-gravity division next season." Kalax was about to respond when another announcement came through. "Quick update on the teleport tag match. The Regelian team has requested to enter as wildcard competitors. They've developed something they're calling photonic displacement surfing, and want to demonstrate it during the halftime show. Safety Committee has provisionally approved, pending successful containment field stress tests. Also, the snack bar is now offering probability pretzels. They might be salty, they might be sweet. You won't know until you collapse the wave function." "You know what the really interesting part is?" Zixna continued, her spots now pulsing in the pattern that indicated deep analytical thought. "All these hybrid sports are leading to genuine scientific breakthroughs. The Arcturians' probability manipulation techniques have applications in quantum computing, and the Andromedans' refined teleportation control might revolutionize transportation technology." "So what you're saying is," Kalax began, his tendrils slowly forming the pattern of dawning realization. "The humans were right all along," Zixna finished. "Their X-science approach, treating research like an extreme sport, actually works. When you combine human-style audacity with various species' natural capabilities and traditional safety protocols." She was interrupted by yet another announcement. "Breaking news! During preliminary safety testing, the Rigelian team accidentally discovered a new form of quantum entanglement. Safety Committee is reviewing footage now. In related news, the Physics Department is requesting volunteers for what they're calling Project Radical Relativity. Prior experience with quantum surfing and/or theoretical physics preferred but not required. Must be willing to sign extensive liability waivers and have a positive attitude toward temporal uncertainty." Kalax's tendrils drooped in resignation. "I suppose I should prepare another report for the High Council?" "Already done," Zixna said, her spots pulsing smugly. I took the liberty of preparing a comprehensive summary of the last 6 months' developments. I've titled it, The Quantum Leap, How Human Extreme Sports Are Revolutionizing Galactic Science and Culture, or Why We Should Have Known Better Than to Give Them Access to Quantum Physics. That's actually a very good title, Kalax admitted. Thank you. I've been taking a human creative writing course. Did you know they have something called clickbait? It's fascinating, really. She was cut off by yet another announcement. Attention all species. The Hive Mind Collective has just proposed something they're calling synchronized quantum consciousness surfing. Safety Committee is still trying to understand exactly what that means, but it sounds awesome. Sign-up sheets are by the snack bar, next to the new Schrodinger's Snacks vending machine, now with a 50% chance of dispensing antimatter-flavored chips. Kalax and Zixna exchanged looks, or their species equivalent, before simultaneously heading toward Recreation Zone 3. After all, as humans would say, if you can't beat them, join them. Besides, the Quantum Crunch cereal was surprisingly good, even if each bite had a small chance of temporarily altering your perception of linear time. Part 4. The Galactic Games, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Quantum Chaos. Order in the chamber. High Council Member Tazax's tendrils flashed the universal pattern for, everyone please shut up for 5 minutes. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had devolved into what humans would call a productive chaos, which was, ironically, exactly what they were there to discuss. Kalax stood at the podium, his spots pulsing with what could only be described as diplomatic nervousness. Beside him, Zixna was doing her best to organize their presentation while simultaneously trying not to look too amused at the situation. Now then, Tazax continued, once the chamber had quieted somewhat. You're telling us that the humans want to organize something called the Pan-Galactic Extreme Games? That's correct, Kalax confirmed. Though they're also calling it X Games Infinite, or sometimes just the Radicalympics. A murmur went through the chamber as various species translation matrices attempted to process these terms. And this proposal has already been endorsed by... How many species? Tazax asked, their tendrils forming the pattern that indicated they already knew the answer but needed to hear it officially. 47 at last count, Zixna supplied helpfully, including, somewhat surprisingly, the Silicon Consciousness Collective, who have developed something they call extreme data surfing. They describe it as quantum computing meets parkour, but with information packets. The chamber erupted again, this time with a mixture of concerned wobbling, enthusiastic pulsing, and what appeared to be spontaneous bioluminescence from several of the more excitable species. Please. Tazax raised all 4 appendages for silence. Let's handle this methodically. Kalax, your report mentions something about the humans establishing a new academic discipline? Ah, yes. Kalax's tendrils perked up. They're calling it extreme xenophysics. It's a combination of traditional physics, xenobiology, and what they term radical innovation methodology. The basic principle is that by combining different species' natural abilities with human-style extreme sports approaches, we can discover new physical phenomena and technological applications. And this has led to... Tazax prompted, though their tendrils suggested they were already bracing for the answer. Well, Zixna jumped in, her spots pulsing with barely contained excitement. In the past 3 months alone we've seen the Arcturians' probability manipulation techniques leading to a 300% improvement in quantum computing efficiency. The Andromedans' refined teleportation control spawning a whole new field of spatial physics. The Hive Mind Collective's synchronized consciousness surfing somehow creating a new form of faster-than-light communication. And just last week, the Silicon Consciousness Collective's extreme data surfing accidentally created what they're calling quantum memes, which are either a new form of information transfer or a very enthusiastic art movement. We're still not quite sure. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, a representative from the crystalline harmonics spoke up, their crystalline structure vibrating in what humans had learned to recognize as cautious enthusiasm. We have also been experimenting with these human methodologies. Our recent attempts to combine our natural resonance abilities with quantum surfing principles have led to some interesting discoveries in the field of energy transmission. Interesting how? Tazax asked, immediately regretting the question. We can now theoretically transform any dance party into a power station, the crystalline representative explained. their structure now vibrating at what could only be described as rave frequency. We're calling it quantum dance power generation. Before Tzatz could process this, another announcement echoed through the chamber. Attention council members. The Silicon Consciousness Collective's quantum meme exhibition will begin in 10 minutes in the auxiliary chamber. Organic beings are reminded to wear their reality anchors, as some memes may cause temporary existential uncertainty. Also, the snack bar is now offering binary bites. They're either ones or zeros, but you won't know which until you digest them. Kalax's tendrils formed what was now known throughout the galaxy as the "just another Tuesday with humans" pattern. Perhaps I should mention that Lieutenant Thompson and her team have also submitted a proposal for what they're calling the Extreme Research Exchange Program. Do I want to know? Tzatz asked, their tendrils already forming defensive patterns. It's actually quite brilliant, Zixna said. The idea is to create a galactic network of research facilities where different species can collaborate on developing new extreme sports and studying their scientific applications. They're calling it the Radical Research Network, or somewhat inevitably, the X-Files. And the humans believe this will lead to, in their words, either the most awesome scientific breakthroughs in galactic history, or the most spectacular fails compilation ever. Either way, we win. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as a multi-species facepalm. You know what the really interesting part is? Kalax added, his spots now pulsing with genuine academic excitement. They might be right. By removing the traditional barriers between sports, science, and species, we're seeing unprecedented levels of innovation and cooperation. The Arcturians are teaching probability manipulation to the Andromedans, who are teaching teleportation techniques to the crystalline harmonics, who are teaching resonance theory to the Silicon Collective. It's like the entire galaxy has become one giant experimental laboratory. With safety waivers, Zixna added helpfully. So many safety waivers, Kalax agreed. The legal department has had to develop new quantum-based filing systems just to keep up with all the paperwork. Tzatz's tendrils formed what humans would later term the enlightened resignation pattern. And I suppose you're both here to recommend that the Council not only approve these pan-galactic extreme games, but also formally endorse the Extreme Research Exchange Program? Well, Kalax began diplomatically, given that most species are already participating informally. And considering that the alternative is trying to regulate an underground extreme sports scene spanning multiple dimensions, Zixna continued. Not to mention the fact that the humans have already designed the logos and merchandising, Kalax added. The merchandising is quite impressive, the crystalline representative chimed in, their structure now sporting what appeared to be a holographic Quantum Surfing World Tour sticker. Tzatz raised their appendages for silence once again. Very well. The Council will take this under advisement, though I suspect we all know where this is heading. After all, as the humans say, if you can't beat them, join them. Though I'm fairly certain they never intended that phrase to apply to quantum physics. As if on cue, another announcement echoed through the chamber. Breaking news! The Hivemind Collective's synchronized consciousness surfing team has just accidentally achieved simultaneous existence in 3 parallel dimensions. Safety Committee is reviewing the footage and requests that any beings experiencing temporal echoes or spontaneous consciousness expansion please report to Medical Bay for what they're calling radical reality realignment. Also, the snack bar is now offering multi-dimensional munchies, now with a chance of tasting flavors that don't exist in our universe. Kalax and Zixna exchanged looks as the chamber erupted into excited discussion. Their spots pulsed in perfect synchronization, forming the pattern that had become the universal signal for, the humans have done it again. After all, who would have thought that humanity's peculiar approach to survival, treating every deadly challenge as an opportunity for both sport and science, would end up revolutionizing not just galactic athletics, but the very nature of scientific research itself? To be continued, across multiple dimensions and probability states.